Jessica Jett takes off. First chapter. Got to read the dedication. To the nurses in the world, to the best part of medicine, and to their kids, raised tough and smart enough to keep the blood off the good towels, and to soccer, the beautiful game. Chapter 1. We are into September now, and school had started for my friends 2.5 weeks ago. I could picture the hallways, the bathroom, the cafeteria, and the classrooms. I could see the knot of students on the front steps of the school, pressed tighter as the days got shorter and the mornings colder, standing there waiting as the minutes clicked closer to the bell when the doors would be flung open and the press of students would flow, rushing into the halls. Like plastic being squirted into a mold, Mel had said. Eager plastic for some reason. I remember the rushing in, although I couldn't remember why I had felt eager. When I was younger, I think it was fear and some unbearable worry about how the day would go, or maybe hope. How I would do on a test, who I would talk to in the hall, where would I sit at lunch? What might we do in PE? Would there be teams? Would I be chosen? Who would like me? Who would be mean? I could remember those feelings, those hopes and fears, but they seemed pretty silly to me now. Pathetic, really. I had been recalibrated. I wasn't in school this morning and hadn't been since last year because now I was pretty much living at Dartmouth Hospital. It was technically in New Hampshire, but right on the edge, and was pretty much Vermont's big hospital anyway. I'd been there plenty before. My mom worked there as a med-surg nurse, wearing her green PJs, her knot for playing with stethoscope around her neck, her goofy white sneakers squeaking a little on the wide wax floors. My dad would drop us off in the big mall area downstairs when he was heading off to a meeting, and my mom's shift wasn't over yet. Me and my younger brother Eric. We started this when he was small enough for me to have to carry him. He might have been 2, and I would have been 10. I had an egg-sized muscle on my right arm from hauling him around with me. You can see it in the pictures from back then. But now my mom was a patient, not a nurse, and I was here pretty much full time, sitting by her bed, waiting. The first floor of the hospital is the closest thing to a mall that Vermont has. There are fast food places, a Starbucks, a bookstore, a newsstand, gift shops, a hair salon, a toy store, which is where Eric and I would usually end up. All of it indoors, with the ceiling maybe 3 stories up and lots of glass and light. It's great, especially in the winter, and if they didn't have it tucked way out of town, teenagers would make it a destination place. Back then, when we were dropped off, I would walk up and down the aisles, Eric mounted on my hip, tugging my t-shirt out and stretching the neck or even trying to chew on it. I'd push his hands off and try to distract him with whatever toy he wanted. There were little stuffies, cats and dogs and bunnies first, and then hand-sized trucks and cars. When he was old enough to walk holding hands, I could barter a quick trip to the toy store with a longer visit to the bookstore after. I'd watch the clock and make sure we were back out on the padded bench in front of the security desk by the time my mom popped out of the elevator. She would wave, smiling at us, but waving us off all at the same time. No hugs, no touching until we got home, and Mom got a shower and clean clothes. Cooties, you know, from her nursing stuff. I didn't know it then, but those were the good old days. We didn't visit the hospital these days. Instead, we pretty much just visited our house, getting a quick shower and a change of clothing, changing out the books that I'd already read for a new stack of books that I'd already read, packing up a bag of Fig Newtons, the not really a cookie that we were permitted to have. Dad would put the mail in the mail pile on the kitchen table where we used to eat, and then we'd blow back out the door, back into the car for a silent 32-minute ride back to the hospital. We timed our visits home to miss the morning horror that they put my mom through every day. Fresh sheets, fresh gown, fighting off bed sores, but forcing her body to move, even though it hurt so bad. It would be done by the time we got back, but we could still see it in her eyes, all shocked looking, and I felt awful for not being there with her when it happened. It was bad enough seeing her eyes when we got back. She couldn't say a whole lot at that point, but her eyes had that look you see in the PETA ads where the fox has its foot in a trap. Only with my mom, the trap was inside her, where she couldn't pull free. She had cancer, of course. I'd settled into her hospital room, number 426, like an expert. It was the third room we'd been in this time around. We were up on the fourth floor, which has a glass atrium at the end of the hall, with a view to the west, where the wide Connecticut River set the boundary between New Hampshire and Vermont. My dad went to the atrium to do what business he could over the phone, and I would take my brother there when he started to fidget. I'd packed a bunch of his cars and even some of the bridges and track and stuff that went with them, all shoved into one of the cloth shopping bags my mom had insisted on using. There was a bench over by the window, and he and I would set up the cars, and then he'd run them back and forth, making car sounds that he does. I remember he did a lot of car crashes, making the screeching tire sound and the smashing metal sound, not really quiet like he probably should have been there in the hospital. But it was my mom's old workplace, and everyone there knew her, and they felt bad, and they let us do pretty much whatever we wanted. The atrium was close enough that whoever was in my mom's room could just stick their head out the door and yell in case we needed to run back to be with my mom. That's pretty much what we were waiting for at this point. I'm Jessica Jet Harrison. Harrison because that's my dad's name, and my mom went with Harrison when she married him. My grandfather on my dad's side is dead. He was an alcoholic, but nice, I guess. My mom's mom, my Uma, she drinks pretty much too. We see her sometimes, and she comes to the hospital in the morning someday. Just a few minutes, bringing something she baked usually. She's nice too, but really a morning person. My mom's bio parents were the Petersons, Randy and Sylvia. No grandparent nicknames for them since we don't see them ever. They live in Massachusetts, which is not that far away, but my mom ran away from them when she was 16, and she still hates them pretty much, even now. My dad had asked her about letting them know that she was sick here in the hospital, and she got really mad and told him to not call them ever, ever, ever. He agreed, so I guess they won't come. So, Jessica comes from a record that my mom really likes. It's the second song on the B-side of Brothers and Sisters by the Allman Brothers. My mom has the album in vinyl with a little boy on the front and a little girl on the back. She listened to it when she needed to get on the stick, usually with housework or getting us ready for a trip or something. I remember the piano banging away, the drums and the bass loud and strong, and my mom dancing around the house, usually with me or my brother in her arms. The song made her really happy. That's why I'm named Jessica for the song, to remind me to be happy. Jet comes from an album too, or two albums really, both of which my mom has. The early one is called The Runaways, a girl band with Joan Jett doing most of the singing. They're like 15, maybe younger, kids. The other album is Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, made later when Joan was an adult. Joan's on the cover of both of them, and she looks like a real badass, even when she was a kid. My mom was a runaway, if you remember, and so maybe that's why she liked the album. But the Jet in my name is about being a badass. My mom was clear about that. She wanted me to be happy, like the Jessica song, and she wanted me to be tough, like Joan Jett, a badass, because life is hard, you know. Turns out she was right about that. After my mom ran away, she lived in Boston for a while, and then she headed up to Maine. She won't talk about the months she spent in Boston, which I guess were pretty bad, but we go up to Maine every summer and stay with the family that took her in when she was still 16. I'm 15, so when I think about being on my own at 16, it feels like being a kid really, not at all like being a grown-up. I guess she was hitchhiking, and Meg picked her up. Meg is our real grandmother and a nurse there at the hospital in Westbrook, Maine. She reamed my mom out for hitchhiking, and my mom was like, yeah, whatever, I can take care of myself. But Meg took her home and put her own two little kids back into one bedroom and gave my mom a bed of her own. The story is that my mom slept for like 30 hours or something, and Meg washed her clothes and sent her husband Bill out to pick up some more, And when they finally woke my mom up for dinner, there were clean clothes in the dresser, books on the table, and even a guitar propped up in the corner that Bill had loaned. Dinner that first night was pot roast with homemade bread and homemade brownies for dessert. My mother had been pretty much living on fast food leftovers at that point, which is what you can snag at a McDonald's or a pizza place, stuff that people weren't going to eat. My mom ate about 3 plates full of everything and half a pan of brownies, and then went back to bed. She stayed there in that room, living with Meg and Bill for the next 4 years. She got a GED, which is what you can get if you drop out of high school, and then an RN degree, which is what lets you be a nurse. She even learned to play the guitar. She thinks of Meg and Bill as her real parents, even though they only showed up right there at the end of her childhood. Trish and Tony, their 2 kids, are like my cousins. No nicknames for those grandparents. I just call them Meg and Bill. They're coming every weekend now. My dad was living in Maine at that point. He was bussing tables at a big restaurant called the Lighthouse, where he worked while he was in his engineering program in Portland. Mom got a job there waitressing, and the rest, as they say, is history. I was born in Maine and got to go to the wedding they had right there by the ocean. I've seen the pictures. I was super cute, and my mom was barefoot. Meg and Bill are in the picture, and so is Uma. Maine has always been kind of a magical homeland for my family. We go up there in the summer, taking my mom's Subaru with the back packed all the way up to the ceiling and more, with stuff packed between my brother and me. We never just go to Maine, we always go back to Maine, like returning to the ancestral hunting grounds or something. We only moved because my dad got an engineering job with the state of Vermont, which is harder to get than a nursing job, which you can get just about anywhere. They paid my mom $1,000 just to come work at Dartmouth. Meg and Bill had come down and they visit when they can, but they both still have to work, so they usually only come down for the weekend. So, there you have it, my family before, BC, before cancer. I was sitting in my mom's room, number 426, tucked into the good chair since my dad was out doing his laptop cell phone job thing, with Eric tagging along to play his car stuff on the big bench by the window. My mom was asleep, and I scooted the chair right up next to the bed. I had the rail drop down, which must have violated some policy because a few of the nurses would always hitch it back up and tell me, "This needs to stay up." I always dropped it back down as soon as I could. I had one hand holding my book and the other hand holding my mom's hand. Her hand was warm, but completely still. Her nails had been trimmed the day before by Judy, by one of my mom's nursing buddies, and they looked perfect. Mom got on palliative care 2 weeks ago. Palliative care is where they change the focus from get you better, which wasn't going to happen in my mom's case, to get you more comfortable, which was possible if you didn't mind her sleeping all the time. I didn't mind, I really didn't. We couldn't talk anymore, but it was way better for her to be sleeping all the time than when she'd been hurting so much before. Screaming and crying. I can't think about it. But that's why sleeping was better. Obviously, it's still awful, but it's better than what we had before. Recalibrated over and over. I was rereading an old favorite, Motherless Brooklyn, by Jonathan Lethem. It's a great book. Maybe not the best choice for hospital reading, since there are bits in it that are funny enough to make you laugh really loud. I was trying to skip over the funny parts, but I'd read the book enough to know what was there, even if I wasn't reading it. I was trying to muffle a laugh when my mom's hand twitched just a little. She had her eyes opened and looked worried. Her mouth was dry and she hadn't said anything for 2 weeks, but it looked like she was trying to say something. I dropped my book on the floor and got into a panic like I should get my dad, but that I couldn't leave her. And you aren't supposed to yell at the hospital, and I didn't want to scare her. I looked at her, and she looked right at me. She knew me, I could tell. She gave up on trying to say anything and just made a little smile with her mouth and her eyes, and then she made a little kissing thing with her lips to me, and then she died. She hadn't really moved for the last week or so, except when people were moving her. She was on a lot of morphine. and even her breath was shallow and really slow, so it wasn't like what you could see there in the bed had changed a lot. She was still just lying there, the sheets smooth and nice where I'd tucked it in, her hair neat and loose on the pillow, brushed out with my fingers. But one minute, I was sitting there with my mom, thinking how much she'd like the book I was reading, and how she'd probably try to make me laugh if I wasn't supposed to. And now I was just sitting by myself. I could feel that. She was gone. So that's chapter 1. You'll have to trust me that it does get better. Starts off hard. Like life is. Life is hard sometimes. Jessica's tough, and she's got soccer and her buddies to pull her through. But anyway, there's chapter 1 of Jessica Jet Takes Off.